worry about that. But
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to have another session today on topics we talked about last week, which were dating boundaries. So today we're going to have our question and answer session to discuss further information on the dating boundaries. But before we get started, I wanted to make you all aware that starting in January, the first part of January, we are going to be having weekly discussions and teachings on how social media affects the teenage brain. And if any of you are interested in that, I would encourage you to get the book. It's called The Anxious Generation. It's by Jonathan Haidt, Haidt. That's the book that we're going to be studying from. So I wanted to give everybody a heads up, but that'll be on Wednesdays starting in January. Tuesdays will be our regular podcast, and then Wednesdays it's going to be specifically dealing with um, lessons from that book. Okay, so let's get started tonight.
yes.
First question that came in was, how can I get out of a situation where my safety is being compromised?
Okay, so if we're looking at this in the dating aspect and you're dating somebody and your safety is being compromised, remember safety and feeling safe is one of your boundaries. That's a non-negotiable boundary. That's something we cannot compromise. So if you're in an unsafe or you maybe feel you could be unsafe, um, a go-to option could be to make up an excuse, maybe a lie to try to get out of there. Kind of like when you're at a sleepover and you've never been to that person's house, kind of uncomfortable, so you kind of make up an excuse to leave or maybe a white lie to kind of make it go more smoothly. Um, but if we're talking about safety, lying is okay because usually I do not condone lying or would like to encourage it. But in that aspect, I would lie or make up an excuse. But definitely make sure you're texting a close friend or family member, especially a parent. If that's realistic to you, and send your location if your location isn't out there already. That's very important because, again, your safety may be compromised. And your last and important solution would be to call 911 if you need to. A in domestic violence situations can pretend to call a pizza place or pretend that they want a pizza, and usually 911 operators are trained to kind of assess the situation and know that you need help in that kind of aspect. So that's your next solution if possible.
Okay, I didn't know that about the pizza thing. That's
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
Yes.
The next question, what's a healthy way to update or change my boundaries as I grow without feeling like I'm being inconsistent or confusing?
Okay, so again, in the aspect that you're dating somebody, um, so the way we kind of find out our boundaries and place our boundaries is from our values, and from our values is from what we know. So as we grow, everyone learns and they kind of figure out different things in their life, and it's constant knowledge. So when you learn, maybe you might change a boundary, or maybe you might put a boundary up where you didn't have before. And that's what I think you should share with your significant other or partner, um, that what you've learned and why you think a boundary there is important. I think that's really clear, and the explanation of maybe why is a little bit more courteous because, again, you don't have to explain your boundaries, but that's something we can compromise in a relationship, maybe giving a reason. Um, but in all regards, as long as they respect your boundaries, that's what's important.
Next question is, is it setting a boundary if my partner expects me to text or call back within a certain time?
I don't think it's a boundary. My personal opinion is I definitely know it's not a boundary. I think it could be more classified as an unrealistic expectation. Um, because a boundary is supposed to protect from disadvantage, I guess you could say. Um, and that person putting that up wouldn't be them protecting themselves. It would be more of a control or power. Um, and so you need to look out for that because it is kind of considered controlling because they are controlling kind of your boundary with your time and your space. That's something that everyone has. That's their independence. And when they are expecting a quick response, even though they may be holding themselves to that same expectation, it doesn't mean that is realistic one. I also want to add that in there because it causes more disadvantage if we're thinking about it because it limits your time. You can't sit there and spend time with your friends because you have to text them back, or you can't sit and focus on a project because your mind is constantly reminding you to text them back. And it's kind of like conditioning somebody. It's kind of like conditioning your brain to have a quick response. And I don't think it's healthy for anybody to intertwine in your brain like that. That's not what a healthy relationship looks like. And it definitely messes with your energy levels as well because you can communicate that you're busy, but sometimes that can be exhausting and it is you're overusing your time. Um, on one thing, and that's just kind of something we're not built to do. But yeah, it is not a boundary. It's unrealistic expectation.
How can I compromise when my partner needs to talk right away when upset, but I need to cool off first?
I've been asked this before, and I think compromise is good, and I don't think that you need to make yourself uncomfortable and talk right away if that's something that you aren't comfortable doing in the first place. I think standing firm on what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with is important. However, um, if you're that person who needs to cool off right away, maybe you could say, "Hey, I'm really, really frustrated right now. And if we talk, it's not going to be a healthy talk. I need a few minutes." That would be something you could do to compromise instead of just complete silence. That's something I would do. I think that's fair. It lets the other person know that you need time and how you feel. It's kind of it's putting a boundary up, and that person should respect that boundary, but it also kind of gives them a little something to hold on to so they're not completely shut out or they're not completely stuck with their thoughts because there is people who need to talk right away. So giving them a little bit of maybe how you feel in that moment is something that you can compromise.
Okay.
Mhm.
Next question is, can I set a boundary with nonverbal communication? Which means, can I set a boundary when I'm not talking face to face with somebody?
Yeah. So my answer to that would probably be no. And I'm thinking more in the sense of uh like um maybe body movement or your physical body cues, or that's kind of what I mean by the nonverbal. Um but boundaries cannot be set unless they're directly stated. So that's why I'm going to answer that with no. You can't assume boundaries and people can't read your mind. Um there are non-negotiable boundaries, yes, but not everybody understands that and not everybody knows that, and that's why they still need to be directly stated. Um, just to kind of prevent um, boundary crossing, especially if it's the non-negotiable boundaries that you really care about. Um, but in the sense that you may be if you're with your partner and maybe they say they're comfortable with something, but you're kind of getting the cue that they're not from their body movement or something, that would be a good sign to stop what you're doing and maybe ask if they're okay. In those ways, you can, I guess, see a boundary, but I wouldn't still consider it a boundary. I think it's important to look at the nonverbal cues because there are times that your partner may be uncomfortable, and I think it's important that it's addressed, even if they're not the ones addressing it sometimes. I don't know if that makes sense completely, but no, it's not a boundary, but look out for maybe if your partner is showing some signs of being uncomfortable.
Okay, to add to that a little bit, I think when we're looking at social media,
Mhm.
outside of FaceTiming, there's virtually no opportunity to pick up on nonverbal communication. That would be facial reaction, it may
Mhm.
be other physical reaction as something you're discussing with that person. So I would say outside of FaceTiming, um, it's impossible to have a complete two-way form of communication, verbal as well as nonverbal.
Correct. And yes, in the virtual world, nonverbal communication is not a thing. That is correct.
Is it okay if my partner and I have boundaries that don't align with each other?
I think I think boundaries can coexist in certain ways, but we got to remember where our boundaries are coming from, and they come from our values, what we value. And everybody has core values. That's going to be one of your main should be one of your more important um aspects in a partner is if you guys share core values, because that also means you guys share lifestyles. And I'm not saying all core values need to align, but in some aspects they do. Maybe religious reasons you want or your core values to align, which your boundaries would align. I think that also just depends on the person as well. Um, so that's kind of what you have to think. Is this my core value, something that is cultural or um, maybe religious or even maybe an interest that you have a core value on or a parenting style? It could be anything. Those things are something that you look out to be familiar in your partner. So, in some aspects, they can coexist, um, being different. But, like I said, just pay attention to the core values. Um, but things like your interests and hobbies, I think, are definitely okay to be a little bit different from each other.
Okay, I think it's important to distinct between dating and friendship.
Mhm.
Because in friendships, rarely are you going to have common values
Yeah.
or common understandings. It's a friendship. But when you get into a dating relationship, it's like a level up. And there it's very important that your core values do align with each other.
Mhm.
Okay. Next question. What are examples of places that should not have PDA, which means public display of affection?
Okay, so I wanted to go over this. I kind of So I'm glad it was asked because I kind of went over it a little bit, but I wanted to kind of get more into it when it comes to like more specific places, because there is times I see inappropriate PDA, which is public displays of affection. So in in a bigger, I guess, picture, it's going to be formal places, like places of work and school. Those are formal places that you do not want to participate in PDA. I would say at all. Um, just because it's a reflection of yourself and I guess not your partner, and you need to go in there, get your work done, whether it's school or your workplace. Focus on that, um, because that's important as well. And then another thing I wanted to add in is funerals and then weddings sometimes. Funerals is kind of, I don't wanna say obvious because like I said, there is some times where, you see public displays of affection at a funeral, but it's just kind of that way of reading a room. I hear a lot that, I've been hearing a lot of people don't know how to read a room. They don't get that some places are more reserved or some places are more, um, for chit chat or whatever you want to say. And it is really important. And I think it's definitely going to be talked about in social etiquette tomorrow. Um, but funerals, for the simple fact that we're not there for public display of affection. We're there to honor a past relative or loved one. Um, Formal dinners, for the reason of it's a formal event and PDA, public displays of affection, shouldn't be there. Maybe hand holding, same as funerals. I would say simple hand holding. Informal dinners, maybe simple hand holding, but kept to a very minimum. Um, just because we are there to focus on the meal and the people we're spending time with. Family, especially if you're a young adult or teenager, and I see it as a respect thing, kind of, even in my own house. Um, it's just, I don't think it's appropriate to be all up on each other with family there. It's something that should be private and personal to the two of you. And again, or not again, but superiors, people that um, are kind of up there in the hierarchy. So, important people, to put it in simple terms. Um, those are kind of like a general area of where you shouldn't do PDA. Like I said, it's kind of the fact of being able to read a room and read an event based off what people are wearing, um, the chit chat or how much chatter there is, kind of the scenery, just kind of how the crowd is behaving. You can kind of tell what's appropriate and what's not appropriate from those things.
Okay. What Alexis is talking about is a dating relationship. We're not talking about, there are customs, there are cultures where embracing or hugging is a normal form of welcoming somebody.
Yes.
This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about in a dating relationship. So there's times when it is appropriate, especially at a funeral, that you may hug a family member to comfort them or to share in their grief. Um, but it's important to understand. I think the one thing is, and we're going to talk about, Alexa's going to talk about this tomorrow night at some length, are social etiquette issues. And I think one thing we are very negligent on in this culture are manners. And I think that's something that we're going to have much more discussion about because that seems to be the most noticeable personal thing that I see in with teenagers. So we'll deal with that tomorrow. So the next question is, as a young adult, what is an appropriate age gap? And what we're talking about here, Lex is going to talk about it, but it's what would be appropriate in terms of how many years apart would be acceptable in a dating relationship.
Okay. When we are growing up, so in our late teens, I think is appropriate to start dating. So I'm going to say 16, but realistically, people date a lot earlier before then. So I think if you're around 16, the two age gap is a good rule to follow. If you're 16, no older than 18. If you're 15, no older than 17. If you're 17, no older than 19. I think in some cases, even 3 years can be a little messy. And that's just because in that awkward time period of a teenager, young adult, there's a lot of different lifestyle maturity going on. And I'm not saying you're not mature for your age, because I hear it all the time. I know you're 18 and you're mature for your age, but the 22-year-old with a full-time job and an apartment is not an appropriate person to be dating because you guys have a complete different lifestyle maturity, and that's different to your behavior maturity. And that's really important because that person is in a different place in their lives than you are. And I'm not saying that that's something that's necessarily bad, but in like I said, in those in between years of being legally a minor and an adult can get really messy. Even if you are 17, dating a 20-year-old, that 20-year-old can get in big trouble because if your parent doesn't like that, you are still a minor and they can still get legally in trouble. Um, that's why it's so messy. And I see a lot of the time, um, like a 17-year-old with the 20-year-old, and in length, yes, it's 3 years, but that 20-year-old, like I said, can have an apartment and be wanting kids at that time. There's people who want kids young, and you are still in high school because you're 17. Those are 2 very different lifestyle maturities, no matter how mature you can behave, and that's why it's important. Um, Even I see 16 and 18, I think that's okay because, you guys are still in high school, but maybe if that 18-year-old is going on 19 and going in college, that's still something you want to look into because it's something that you're not going to be going into for another few years because you're only 16. So that's something you need to look at. So definitely like a 2-year age gap is something I would follow. Um, and then your lifestyle maturity, definitely look at that before you start dating anybody.
Okay, I want to add something to this. I deal with, on a weekly basis, with teenagers and young adults. And it's not uncommon for me to sit down with a young lady that's 16 and she's dating a 25-year-old. And I think what has to be recognized is what is the motive for someone older dating somebody considerably younger? And a lot of times, the teenager is infatuated with an older individual. But I think there becomes a time when parents need to recognize the inappropriateness of this and step in and be a parent.
Mhm.
So, enough on that. If my partner crosses a boundary but apologizes and tries to fix it, how do I know if I should give them another chance or end the relationship?
So, a big thing that I've even said and that's preached a lot is when someone crosses your boundary, that person needs to be out of your life. But like I said, also time and time again, everything that I talk about is it's kind of like everything's on a line, but the dots can be pointed in different directions, but it's all kind of staying on one line. And what I mean by that is not everything's set in stone and there's exceptions to everything. And in this aspect, if somebody crosses a boundary and they're sorry for it and they take accountability and um that's I guess trying to fix it is what was in the question. You need both. People can apologize time and time and time again. Um And I think words matter a lot, but it's the action that goes with the words. And that's where the accountability comes in because somebody can say sorry and that's like putting a band aid over a bullet hole, but you need to actually patch the hole, even though there could be scarring. I don't know if that's a good metaphor, but definitely apologize and take accountability as much as possible. I know in some aspects people can't just get up and take accountability, but maybe like the next time you cross that same scenario, they do it differently, and that'd be a way of taking accountability, doing it differently to not make the same mistake they made. So definitely give grace sometimes, especially if it's the first time they cross that boundary. The first time is a mistake. The second time um, is not a mistake. People usually don't make mistakes twice, but every scenario is different and there's or exceptions to everything. Um, but you still need to hold expectations for your boundaries. That still doesn't mean compromise your boundaries or let things go. Um, and I'm not saying keep bringing it up over and over again. I'm just saying don't brush it off in the sense of maybe they won't do it again. You're still allowed to hold them to your boundaries because they are yours. And if they're wanting to be in your life, that's something that they are going to need to respect.
Do you think there are various levels of boundaries that require more immediate attention, such as sexual advances that very much violate the boundaries you've set up? Um, how much grace do you provide in situations like that?
In those situations, I know that everybody, and especially if it's a boundary that's been directly stated, know right from wrong. And in those aspects, if that person were to do that, um, you do not have to give them another chance. I think that would be something that was up to you because that is more of a violating thing that can happen. And it can be really traumatizing too. So, in that aspect of it being more serious and possibly getting more legal or illegal, um, I think ending things is definitely an option for you. I'm not saying it just depends on scenario and how you feel and um, how I don't want to say strict your boundary is, but I want to say more valued your boundary is in those aspects. Um, but yeah, depending on how important boundaries are, those certain boundaries are, and possibly how crucial they are to you, crossing those boundaries, you do have the option to end things if that's how you feel.
Do you think in a dating relationship one member of the sex is going to test the boundary to see what the response is going to be?
I I see it in males, more than I do the females testing, but I can't say that all the time because 'cause I've also seen it in females too, testing male boundaries. I think it can go both ways, um, but I do see it in men more. Men have, I think, higher libido than girls do, and sometimes it can be a little too high, but it's not something that's uncontrollable. So at the end of the day, it is a choice and there is the difference between right and wrong. So I think there's an understanding there a little bit more, but not it doesn't make it any more okay.
Okay, the final question is, what do I do if my partner cannot understand certain boundaries? Is that question they don't understand the boundaries, or they choose not to understand the boundaries?
I think that question, I think because when you state boundaries, they should be direct. And if we're talking in a relationship sense, and even maybe even like a physical touch sense, um, and a person can't understand the boundary, it's I think they understand in your sense, but they look in their perception and they don't think the same way. So they question why you do not think the way they do. Um, and I think that is more of like choosing not to understand. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who or what or when or why they don't understand your boundary. It just matters if they respect it. Um, even if they think it's the silliest thing in the world, because a lot of the time you'll see that, especially if you don't set boundaries or you're just now setting boundaries in your life with your family members, and they're like, "What do you mean I can't do this? You always let me do this," or whatever the thing may be. They may think it's silly a lot of the time, but the stronger you hold on your boundary, the more it is respected. Um, but it should be met with respect either way, no matter what or why they can't understand it. And you can explain it, but it's not something that you have to do at all. They're your boundaries, and like I said, it doesn't matter if they understand. It just matters if they respect it.
Okay. One final question is it more important to have direct communication, one on one communication in establishing boundaries, or can it be done through social media,
What do you mean through social media?
through the
Like
internet,
like
through
texting?
texting, Snapchat, whatever the other sources of data exchange that we use? Do you think that's most effective, or is it most effective in being able to sit down with the individual face to face and discussing how you feel about certain areas of the relationship?
Okay. Um, well, I actually was talking with a friend. Me and her talk all the time over the phone or while we text. And sometimes she always misunderstands my text because she can't hear my tone. Because usually I'm a very like direct, sarcastic person, and you can't get the sarcasm over the phone because of the tone. And that's a good example why I don't think it's a good um, place to discuss feelings and boundaries. I think our brains relate more when we can understand tone and facial expression and sitting face to face and looking somebody in the eye while they speak. We've kind of it's it's kind of like when people can go behind a screen and comment the meanest thing they want. It's your brain kind of has that filter where that emotional block because you're over the screen. Um, I think if I think FaceTime's okay. If you guys wanted to maybe prop the phone up and FaceTime and talk that way where you're both looking face to face and engaging in the conversation, but I think most effectively would be face to face so we can get that emotional connection, um, and understanding, and there's a lot of misconception over text, like I said. My friend and me and my friend, or my friend and I, um we can't understand our tone and sarcasm, and that's my main example on why I think it's important.
Okay, good answer.
Mhm.
Okay, that ends today's question and answers.
Mhm.
Tomorrow, we will be back on talking about what social etiquette is and how that is displayed in the culture we live in today.
Mhm.
So please tune back in tomorrow at 5 for the presentation. Thank you and have a good evening.
Yep.
I had to throw those out. I couldn't resist.